Welcome back to Wildflower. So excited to have you all back here. And we took a nice, long, needed break. And we are back and more excited than ever to walk you through why we took a break and what direction we're headed in now.
Yeah, welcome back, everyone. This is Sophie. And yeah, so we stopped recording, I think it was back in August. And I think at that point, we've been recording the podcast for 5 months. But I don't know if we were burning out, but I just felt like we were so stressed about it.
Yeah, we took the wrong approach to it. We were trying to methodically plan out, organize, and that's not why we started this podcast. We started this because we want to watch and monitor our growth and have it reflected back to us and help others and bring them on the journey as well. And that went underwater.
I think it's so hard because I feel like even when you decide you're interested in something and you feel passionate about it, then you start doing the actual thing. Like for us as a podcast, all of a sudden, all this structure comes in, all this fear comes in, all this concern, stress, not really knowing what to do. And you don't even realize it because you assume that just because you're doing something that you care about means that it's okay if you're stressed. But that's not the case.
Yeah, well, stress and enjoyment don't go hand in hand. And if you're stressed about doing something that you love, you got to dial it back because we were missing the entire point. And that's whenever you're stressed about something, there's pressure and you have to ask, where is this pressure coming from? And for us, like we thought we were actually going to get somewhere once the podcast was perfect.
Yeah.
And there's all this pressure. It was all internal and it was all totally made up. And having space from it, we've realized, no, we want to enjoy doing this. We don't want to be stressed about it.
Well, I feel like for me, I got so excited to start doing the podcast. You know, we were both working right now at our full-time jobs. Neither of us have really been doing anything that we feel passionate about. So this came along. And then all of a sudden, I started getting so obsessive with it. I was checking how many streams are we getting? How many followers are we getting? I started to have so much doubt about our performance of the podcast. Like we would post and the next day I wouldn't feel confident in it. And I wasn't even realizing that this stuff wasn't healthy because first of all, we never did anything like this before, but I think that this is generally applicable to anything you're doing. Like I see it now with my TikTok and Instagram videos. I see it even when I am doing stuff with like meditation. Like the whole idea of when you start doing something, you start to put all this self-created pressure to be so perfect.
I definitely saw that with you around social media. And I definitely saw a big switch by not focusing on that in generally in life, not focusing on just getting to that point versus focusing in the moment and enjoying that. What do you think helped get you to that place? Personally.
So it's interesting. So I have a TikTok page and like I started that posting a lot about like my parents and internalized homophobia and all this stuff. And then I kind of got to the point where I realized like, why am I posting this stuff? I think we've talked about this before where it's kind of like, not that I was leveraging it, but I think subconsciously, deeply subconsciously, I saw that was working and I wanted to keep doing it. It's not that I wasn't truly wanting to help people, but it's because I thought that was the only way that I was doing well on social media, that I had to keep going that approach. So I kind of got stuck into that spiral of like posting about my parents. And then I started realizing like, wait, like this is not really the stuff I want to talk about. But then with the whole thing comes in of like, oh my God, I have these followers. Are they going to be disappointed? Are they going to be upset if I'm changing the kind of the way I'm going with this? And then I guess I kind of realized that like, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, because it sounds what you just described, a lot of living in the future of fear and worry of what's going to happen. And it also sounds like you're looking to find purpose everywhere in the future, but not in this moment. And I think with the podcast, relating it back to this, I think one of the things that we realized was in order for us to enjoy doing this and create an output that someone's going to want to listen to, we have to be enjoying it in the moment because it is an extension of us. So I think that is just so true of anything that you're focusing on, especially like something that you care about. If you're starting a new passion project, it's so easy to get caught up in thinking, well, I want to learn X, Y, and Z, and I want to do X, Y, and Z. And you can feel so stressed that you don't already know all of that, you know, on day 2 of starting this new endeavor. But that's not going to help you move forward. That's actually going to paralyze you in the moment and not allow you to be in the full moment. And I think when you do want to start a new endeavor, whatever that is, creative, career, whatever it is, I think you have to accept that you are an amateur and enjoy that and enjoy just being present and learning in the moment, because being present in the moment, enjoying it, learning it, absorbing it, taking action, that's what's going to allow you to continue to move forward versus being stressed that you don't know what you're doing and not actually making movements.
Yeah, well, I feel like it's almost as if you start something and you get so caught up in, number one, this is going to make me happy. And on that note, like, I think with anything that you're doing, you kind of have to stop and ask yourself, okay, what is the reason that I'm doing this? And I think for when we first started doing the podcast and when I was posting on social media, I was really thinking that my life was going to be better. Like, if I got more likes, if I got more views, if our podcast get better. I kept viewing it as a way to get me somewhere. I kept viewing it as a way to make me happier. And then that reality hits where you're just kind of like, whoa, this is not going to make me happier. And if anything, me chasing happiness from this is, number one, making me kind of hate it. Number two, it's making me just feel miserable. And number three, I'm not really giving it my best. I'm not really giving it my best effort because I'm so caught up with doing this thing to make me happy that I can't even allow myself to be present, to let go, enter that flow state where the creativity actually starts to flow. Because we learned so much, creativity doesn't really come when you're thinking so much about it. It comes when you surrender, when you let go, when you're here, when you're present, when you're not trying to achieve something. And I'm just laughing because it's just like, what were we trying to achieve? I don't know. I think our brains so naturally want that. We're always seeking, we always want something else. So naturally, when you embark on an endeavor, you think that that will be the next thing that will finally get you to that point until you realize that it's not.
Yeah. I feel like that was like such a long period of time. And I think this is really common with social media and just creating anything in general, getting lost in why am I actually creating this because of it's external. We just read The Power of Now, our little book club, and you and
Great book.
And I really liked one of the things that it mentioned of saying anything that brings you pleasure is also going to eventually bring you pain, because anything that's not within you is not going to bring you only joy. Anything externally, pleasure, pain is always going to come. Like the podcast, we would be on the highs being like, oh my God, like this person listened to it in this area, in this country. And then you're stressing so much the night before. So I think as long as you are looking to those things to bring you happiness, they're always going to bring you pain. But if you're like, well, I'm here and I'm now and I feel I don't need this. I'm doing this because I enjoy it. I'm not trying to get my value or my worth or my happiness from it. That's when you get more control over it because it doesn't control you anymore.
I like that. It doesn't control you anymore. Well, so many of the things that we do, we don't realize it, but they do control us so long as you're looking to that thing to complete you. And I think that like the approach I've wanted to start to take is really like for the past few months, like we've really, like we haven't been recording the podcast, but I've really just been focusing on really trying to hone in on how can I be present? How can I operate in this world with so many distractions and just be here? And I think that's really so incredibly hard. And we've had so much, I feel like, happen the past few months of just, I don't even know if they're like a new realization every day. And then you realize you keep having all these realizations where I'm like, oh, whoa, like I feel so good from the podcast, or I feel so good from meditating, or I feel so good from that. Or I feel like I'm actually finally in that flow now, until you fall down again and you realize that you will never be able to get to this point that you want to get to, because the only point to ever be in is right here.
And it takes a lot of struggling to get to that point. A lot of obsessing over things, a lot of numbing, just all ways to avoid the present moment and what you're feeling. Because that's what happens. And I feel like you have to accept that even like when you're working through things and trying to have awareness of yourself, that you're not always going to feel super positive. But as long as you are saying, I don't feel that great, but whatever, I'm like, it doesn't matter because this moment's still really valuable.
And I think like I've had a lot of realizations recently about like thinking about my life in a big picture wise. And let's just say like I live till 80 years old, right? So I picture my life. I think about, okay, whoa, like I've already lived like a good amount of years, like in my later 20s. And I think about all the things that I don't like doing, like I don't like going to a grocery store sometimes. I don't like going to the gym sometimes. I really don't like doing the dishes sometimes. I like vacuuming, but there's a lot of things I don't like doing. And I don't really like sometimes editing the podcast because it's kind of annoying and it kind of requires a lot of thorough, detail-oriented thing. And I catch myself in these points where I'm like, oh, like I don't want to do this. And the reason I don't want to do these things is because I'm not getting immediate gratification. I'm not getting an immediate dopamine hit. I'm not, getting that thrill that comes out when you release the podcast or you do something that you feel good immediately. So what I've really been working on is how to feel good doing the most mundane things. How do you recognize that those moments encompass, if not half of your life?
How do you do that?
I think you do that when really understanding that like you're gonna die. So for example, say you're working on a difficult task. You're so caught up in the idea that you don't want to be doing this thing that you fail to recognize that this is part of the process.
It makes me think of another thing from The Power of Now of saying how, or maybe it was somewhere else. I'm not exactly sure where it was from, but it was saying like, I think it was The Power of Now. Like we don't have problems, we just have situations, and we choose to make things problems by allowing our minds to take control over the situations.
Right. Eckhart Tolle says we have life situations, which means, okay, my computer just broke. That is a life situation. Then if you start dwelling, so then when you have a life situation, you have a few options. You say, this happened, let me figure out how to fix it. Or you say, I can't fix it. Okay. Or, so once you go to the third option of dwelling, ruminating, getting mad, you've officially created a problem.
And then if you're with someone else, say if we're trying to do the podcast together, and then if I've done that, then I've created that for you. I've brought that. And then that becomes an even larger problem where you don't even have control of it anymore.
Right. And I think like you can really feel when you're with somebody, you could feel their energy. You can feel when somebody is stressed. And we've worked through this a lot, just like working together on the podcast or just like in my life. And yeah, that's so true, because if you create a problem, then I now have to be in this bubble where we feel like there's a problem when there's really not. And I think it's so important to really recognize that when a situation happens, that it's a problem doesn't exist except inside our mind. Like, what is a problem? And sometimes I really try to zoom out, like, okay, this is a problem when I'm sitting in my apartment safe. I have food to eat. I have a steady job. How is any of this a problem? We so often forget to understand the big picture of, number one, that you're healthy. Like, we don't know what would it be like if I was sitting trying to edit the podcast and something went wrong and I was dealing with a really hard chronic health condition. What would it feel like then? All I would have wanted at that point was to be there, fully healthy, dealing with what I felt was the biggest issue in the world.
Oh, yeah.
And this is like, I'm processing this right now. Like, shit.
Yeah, your health is the number one thing. That is the only thing that you ever need, truly, because once you don't have that, that is the only thing that you want, is your health. So anything outside of that, it doesn't even seem comparable.
It's making me almost emotional right now because our brains have negativity biases. We want to go and we feed into the negativity because we're so used to living in the world where we have so many problems. We're so used to feeling like we have so many, that everything is this major problem, that it's so hard to really grapple and see that like nothing is a problem, you're living. And it's so hard to apply that on a daily basis. It really is.
It is. And when you were talking, I forget the example you were giving of like, oh, like if I was sitting here editing the podcast and like something was going wrong and it wasn't right, versus if I was sitting here doing with a chronic health condition, like that wouldn't be the first concern I had in my mind. But like, going back to another point of view, say we're setting up equipment and like something always goes wrong with equipment. Like it just never, like with mics, it never goes right. And it's funny because it's like if like anger comes up or like you're like, oh, like why isn't this working in your head, and you get mad after like 5 minutes of trying to setting it up. It's funny because it's like, well, why are you so mad? Like what makes you think that you should be mad about this? And it's like, oh, it's because well, I'm a failure. That's the obvious reason. And like, how funny is that? That your brain like connects to think that like, oh, you're a failure because the equipment's not working 5 minutes in.
So I actually think it's interesting. I want to hear from you because, and I'll share mine. Like, I think that when something doesn't go right, I think depending on our individual life experiences, there's a different reason why that triggers us. So
yes,
okay,
exactly what I was getting at.
I didn't really resonate with that. I don't feel like a failure when the podcast stuff go right, I feel a different kind of feeling. So why don't you say more about that? Like, I'm curious to hear about that. Why, when something doesn't go right, does that make you feel like you're a failure?
Yeah, because I feel like when you grow up with like around a certain amount of like intensity, where the expectation is of other people is that like you have to get this done right the first time, and people who don't get that done exactly correctly, I don't want to see them. They should be dead. I feel like when you grow up like around that kind of environment, you see yourself that way. So you put that pressure on yourself, which is an insane amount of pressure, because we're all human beings and everyone makes mistakes. Literally everyone, mistakes are blessings. Yeah, I mean, I think the pressure feels like you're failing, because if you didn't get it right immediately, for me, it feels like, oh, then something's wrong with you and you don't have the capacity to learn and move forward. So I think like that deep down, like that anger I feel, that's what it's connected to.
That's really interesting, because I think that it just shows that like when we have a situation that doesn't go our way, it's a lot deeper than the computer is not working. Like, it's a lot deeper than that. And like, for me, I feel like I just get frustrated because I'm like, I think I just expect things to work out. I think I just expect that things are going to work out. I don't know if it goes back to my childhood, if I haven't like dealt with much adversity until like recently in my life. I don't know what it is. But when you question it, why does this bother me? For you, it makes you feel like a failure. For me, I'm just frustrated that it's not working out. But for both of the reasons are outside of the actual situation that's happening.
Yeah.
Which is a powerful realization.
Yeah, because it's you're bringing things from the past into the present moment. So it's like if you can let go of that, work through it, or just be aware of it and like kind of laugh at it, because it's kind of funny to like be applying those past situations to the current moment of trying to plug something into your computer. Like, it's kind of funny if you like really zoom out.
It is. I'm thinking about it now.
It can kind of help break up like the strong emotions that you have around it. Of kind of just, I think the first step is like just kind of being aware of and questioning it, of being like, why do I feel like this should be the case right now? And maybe this is teaching me something. Like maybe this is something I can learn from.
Just go back to what you just said. They talk about this a lot in The Power Now, but that is the whole idea of a problem, right? Because if you're fully here, if you're fully in the moment, if you're fully present, nothing can be a problem. If your computer's not working, you then bring your past expectations of life or your future concerns of, I have to go somewhere in the future. Like, he talks all about like all our problems are a result of time. You're bringing things into the past. You're bringing things from the future. But if you're just here in the moment, if you're fully present to recognize that, how could that be wrong? How could anything be bad with that?
Yeah. It's funny because what you just said can be said a million different types of ways, because it applies differently to everyone depending on where they're at. Some situations are really deep seated, and some things that you're carrying with you from the past. Or like deep anxiety to have about the future. I mean, nonetheless, no matter where anyone's at, I think it's like, one, like you have to look at those things directly and say like, why am I so fearful of this, or why am I repeating this? Because until you do that, like I think just from my own personal experience, it's hard to like fully be in the now. But there could be other ways of getting to just like fully being here. But I think it's really always having control over your mind and not letting your mind control you. When your mind controls you, this is basically going to be titled The Power of Now discussion, because I think a great point that he made was like, when you like look at animals that are like hibernating, or they're going through like basic like natural instincts, the difference between like animals and like not domesticated animals, but more so like what you like squirrels and deer and all these things that you see in nature, is that they don't have the level of consciousness mind that we have. Like, we take our mind and like it paralyzes our body and stops our body from doing things, where animals don't do that. They survive the winter. They do all these things because they don't have the mind stopping their body from doing what they innately know what to do. So our mind is what stops us from allowing ourselves to move forward as we are meant to do.
Yeah. I mean, definitely not black and white, because first I'll say I totally agree with that, because when we're living in the mind, when we're not living in the body, meaning we're not, like he says, like you're basically unconscious. Either you're unconscious, meaning you're stuck in your thoughts, stuck in your mind, or you come out of that and you're here and now. And you're in the here and now, there's nothing really to ever be wrong, because nothing is ever wrong here. But I was going to say, in response to what you were saying earlier, like it just goes back to the whole idea that every single thing in life is an opportunity to learn. And I was posting on this today on Instagram, and one of the videos I made, let's just say, you know, like at work, something's happening with your boss, right? And you feel like really stressed about it. You feel like upset. You feel invalidated. The first thing that you can do is be like, oh, I hate my job. I hate this. I hate this uncomfortable, bad situation. Or what I've been doing recently is like asking myself, whoa. Like, take a step back here. Like, why does this really bother you? Like, why are you getting so upset over somebody else? Why is the way that somebody is responding in an email triggering you? There is the opportunity. The opportunity window is right there for you to question and ask yourself, okay, what about the way I view myself that I feel so upset and triggered by the way that my boss is acting? Bam, validation. You start to recognize that I actually feel really hurt because I think that it's my how my boss feels that indicates my self-worth. I think it's that how I'm performing right now at this job is indicating how smart I am, how valuable I am. This can go from work. This can go from what we're working on in the podcast, and it fails. It all go back to investigating. Okay, why do I not have patience? Why am I in a rush? Why do I expect everything to go my way?
Yeah.
Why do I label everything?
I mean, this goes back to what I said earlier. Anything that you're looking to derive happiness from outside of you is always eventually going to bring you pain. So it's like focusing on, you always have what you need inside of you in every single moment. You just have to allow yourself to see it. You have to change your perception, to try on new lenses. Because I think what you were talking about in your video was that like, you don't have to change your scenery. You don't have to change where you're at. You don't have to run away from anything. You just have to change the way that you're seeing it. To change the way that you're seeing it, you have to investigate.
Yeah.
And ask why.
Yeah. And I also think it's like thinking that things are going to be easy. Why do we think that life is going to be easy? It's this idea, these expectations that are actually getting in our way. And it just simply goes back to the computer example. Like our podcast stuff is not setting up, or it goes back to it's raining and your clothes get wet. Like it's like not being able to embrace things that you label as bad.
So interesting point. I think what you say that we want our lives to be easy, I think we feel that way. It's like make a bunch of money and then be able to do whatever you want and not have to do anything, like retire and like just like do nothing. And I don't think anyone actually wants that. They're just trying to escape from a life that they were forced to live that they didn't like, that they like just wanted to rest. I think what we actually all want is like fulfillment, because like when you're actually getting fulfilled and like connecting with something that you really care about, like the work is going to feel different than selling your soul to do something truly to get paid for. Not to say that you can't find joy and happiness in that. I think it depends on different types of people, but I do think there is a subset of people who like they want to just numb out and get away from like their day-to-day life because it's so soul sucking. And I don't think it has to be that way. I think that you can find things that you can work hard at that don't feel that way, that feel, you've mentioned this too, like you want to do something that you give a lot to, but also gives back to you. And for some people, I think that it can give back to like boosting like your ego and saying like, yes, like you're doing a great job. And that's, that does it. Also, a trade, like getting a lot of money. I think maybe that for some people, like that's what they find, like doing things they don't love. But 3, I think there's like the third one, it's like, what do you desire? Like what's the most important thing to you? And putting all of your energy into that. And by nature of like seeing that flourish, like that's what's going to supercharge you. Because I think energy and rest comes from more than just sleep and relaxation. There's so many other places that I think that we neglect to see where it comes from.
I think, yes, I completely agree with that. And I think that it's so difficult for us to see that, to get out of this like rat race that we're living in, to get out of this cycle of living based on these thoughts that we have that are so fear-based, working in a job we don't want to be in, dating someone we don't want to date, living somewhere we don't want to live, doing all these things because we simply just don't know there's another way to live.
And I think the biggest factor is like your environment. Who is around you? Who are your friends? What has your family taught you? What are the people at work doing? Who do you follow on Instagram? Like that's a big one. Like because inevitably like most people spend a lot of time on social media. So really questioning like, who am I following? Like going and muting people and unfollowing, it can be a really healthy exercise.
Yeah.
You don't realize how much input you get from social media, even when you just open it and you see a random person from middle school. You don't have to see that. Like not anything's wrong with that, but like you just, in your day-to-day life, why do you need to see that? So I think the number one thing that limits us really, it's like it is your environment. and that's a great thing about social media too, is that like you can find different things on social media. You never know what you're going to find that might help you.
Yeah.
But I think really evaluating like your environment and what's around you is like, you know, because people come into our lives for different reasons, and sometimes it's to show you a different perspective, and that can be I think the greatest gift.
Yeah. I think with social media too, it's like learning, we were talking about this today, like learning how to use it in your favor. Like you don't need to go onto your Instagram and see John from middle school who you still feel like you don't like. Like it's like either unfollow them or mute them. Recently I've just been muting people because I'm like, I don't want to unfollow them in case I want to connect with them. It's not that I don't like their content, but I don't want to see all this when I log on to my feed. I want to be able to search it because, and I felt a lot more clear-headed after kind of like cleaning out my social media. And I think we all kind of need to like clean out our social media and assess. My rule is does this seeing this person's name make me feel good or bad about myself? If it's bad, I just mute them or unfollow them. And I've been realizing that for some reason, even like a company or a brand I'm following that I really like, I don't want to see that because it might remind me that I want to be somewhere I'm not right now.
And I think another point of like when you do start muting all these people, because inherently like we're going to be on social media, it's just part of it, is that your feed is empty. When you don't follow anyone, like your feed is empty, and you can start to follow things that like, you know, like right now, like I signed up for a holistic nutrition course. Like I'm trying to understand what I can do with this, what this will look like for me. And I'm following a bunch of people who have taken the course and they've since done other things, whether it's like starting an herbal brand. And like, it's really interesting to like keep up with that day to day. It helps me like stay grounded with like what I want to focus on. And I think that that's, you know, that's a great use of social media. Like we always talk about how negative it can be, but like that's such a positive use for it that I didn't even realize that was possible.
Well, when we're talking again in black and whites and we're categorizing it, social media is bad. You're like, okay, well, yes, it can be harmful. Yes, like everything can be harmful. Everything has consequences, but how are you managing it so that you're assessing it to see what is best for you? In life, we have everything in theory and can do us harm. You could go outside and get hit by a car if you don't look both ways when you're crossing the street, right? It's not that we have to get rid of the cars. It's that we have to learn how to cross the street. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, you were laughing, like, imagine me getting hit by a car.
No, it's just a really simple analogy. It's funny.
Yeah, just this funny analogy. But I think that we so often think, like, going back to this, what we were just saying, that we have to change our environment. We have to, interesting, because you were saying it's all our environment. So I do think it is our environment, but it's also not. It's also the way that we manage ourselves within that environment. Because I think it's a combination of both. It's not one or the other, because going back to the whole living where you're living. I've been living in Manhattan for like 6 years, and there's been times where I really feel like I haven't liked it. And recently, after traveling a lot and coming back here, I told myself 5 months ago, yes, there are things in this environment that trigger me. There are loud sirens. There are just random shit happening left and right. But I'm going to not let that bother me, because I'm going to stay present. And if I'm staying present and I'm not staying in my reactive state, it's not going to trigger me. I've really enjoyed being in New York the past few months. So the environment didn't change, but the way that I figured out how to live in that environment in a way that would be healthy for me changed.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm realizing that I sound contradictive at this point, because in the beginning of the conversation, I was saying like your environment doesn't matter.
But again,
it's all contradictive. It's not black and white. Like, it's just not. And I think that like they both matter, but in some things help, right? There's like the intensity of saying like everything you have is already within you every moment, but that's kind of hard to comprehend. So where do you start? You start by evaluating what is around you, who's around you, what are you reading, what's your input, and like that. Those are the kinds of things that are going to help give you the perspective to change your lens and start loving New York, in your example again. Like, yeah, that was like physical space, getting out, like, but it's something inside of you changed. So you have to evaluate too. Like, you're not just gonna like snap your fingers and like boom, like I have everything I have now, like I know that I'm all good. Like, realistically, like you have to have things that are gonna help you get to that point.
Yeah, I'm really actually glad you brought that up, because it is so easy, and I want to be very cautious that we don't say this in the podcast of being too like, it's simple, just get out of your head, just
Absolutely
be here.
not.
And it's like, No, this is a lifelong journey of coming back, going in, not feeling good again. It's like it's never gonna go away.
Yeah.
But what you start to do is like you start to build your toolbox, and just having more tools that you can use to help you navigate through life, right? It's like the only reason now that I feel like I feel more grounded than I did last year is because I put in a lot of work. I really have put in a lot of work, whether that's, making changes of who I hang out with, making changes of what I consume, changing like the practices of what I do every single day, whether that's journaling more, whether that's listening to different podcasts to just change what I'm like listening to. This has all helped me to build an understanding that I can access this moment of presence, but you have to do the work. I don't really like when people say that you don't have to do the work, because you kind of do have to do the work.
Who says that?
Well, I think the whole idea of, you're anxious, well, you shouldn't be, because anxiety is a construct in your mind. Everything's okay. It's like, well, no. You have to get to the point of understanding that it's not about not being
You can't
anxious.
just shut it out.
And you're never going to not being anxious. It's about not identifying with it and knowing that anxiety is not bad. I think it's really important to make that clear to people that, if you're trying to work on being more present, if you're really trying to work on being here, don't feel pressured that if you don't feel that way right now, because you're not always going to feel that way. You're definitely not always going to feel that way. And it comes with more so understanding that you're not always going to feel that way. And that's what allows, because it ultimately goes down to resistance.
You want to know something that I'm thinking about, the positive things of social media right now?
Yeah.
Is that these things can be really fucking hard.
What thing?
Growing and learning about these things and having more control over your emotions, anxieties, and understanding and tracking where does this come from? Why do I feel this way? You can gaslight yourself because you'll feel great one day and then you'll forget that you're in the midst of it the next day and think that you've spiraled away and you don't know what your life is. And that's also just your 20s. But I think
20s in a nutshell, not knowing anything.
I think that social media can be used as such a great reflective tool, just a written or an oral exam. That's kind of what podcasts feel like to me, recently, when we talk about these things and we reflect on them. And I think a lot of people on TikTok, I think, are using it for that reason of tracking their progress with whatever they're working on, whether that's in the arts, whether that's in the wellness area, whether that's for their own healing, whatever it is. I think that can be a really great tool for yourself to see your progress, to look back and be wow, that's where I was a year ago. That's a really great thought. Or I was there a year ago. I've really came a long way. And meanwhile, you're connecting with others as you're connecting with yourself, and it really creating a community. And I feel that's how I'm starting to see social media now. And it's really, really an amazing thing, because it can be isolating going through these experiences, seeing people in your life who aren't going through this. And social media is the ultimate place that you can connect with people who are doing these kinds of things. And that's really cool.
It's powerful. It really is. And I think it, like you said, it can be really isolating. If you're really hard, you feel really lonely, to either number one, feel like you start thinking differently, or just feel like you don't want to keep living the way that you're living. You don't want to keep having these thoughts, and you look around you, your friends, your family, they're kind of all stuck in living in, the unconscious mind, not really understanding how to access, the here and now, clinging to negative beliefs. And I think social media can be really great for that reason, when used correctly, to understand that you could find resources there, you could find communities. And just like you said, it can also be used as a tool to put yourself out there, to have kind of I consider a podcast, now that we took the break, at first I considered the podcast as I want to grow and I don't even know. No, now the podcast is a place for me to grow, to share my thoughts, to use a platform where we discuss things. And connect.
Yeah,
with
I agree.
myself, with you, with other people. And then I can look back in a year and listen to the episode and go, whoa, I've grown so much. Because just like you said, it's hard to kind of have these tests. We don't have a yearly exam. All right, how are you doing in life? So it's kind of on you to figure out, how am I doing? How am I reacting to the cereal that fell on the floor today versus 1 year ago? 1 year ago, I probably would have been really mad and freaked out and felt the stress in me. Today, I just laugh it off. That's a huge deal. And I think we really need to be aware of these achievements that we make, even if they're small, because we have to make an effort. And even if you don't feel comfortable going on social media, try to take maybe your own videos of you on your phone, talking to yourself or talking about things you're going through or journaling things, and really looking back and seeing that progress that you made, because there could be so much progress that is just not recognized. And it's in the recognition of that progress that it's going to allow you to keep growing, because you're going to see and feel so excited about the journey.
Yeah. And like when you're feeling down, like, wow, look at these things that I've done, right? Like I'm not a fraud. These are things that have happened and that I've kept track of.
Well, self-doubt always going to come in. Self-doubt's always going to come back in. So being able to look in and not what you've done and like, oh, I went to Paris and went to Eiffel Tower, what I've done. And well, if that was an accomplishment to you, sure. But I guess and that is great. Like if you can go to Paris, I guess I'm meaning more in the sense of like kind of like going to the mental gym. Like, okay, like what has my progress been in the sense of how am I more present now than I've ever been?
And I think another thing with this is like, what I noticed about you is ever since meeting you, you've always been really good at just not for the sake of like Instagram or social media by any means. Like you just like to take content for the purposes of having it. Like you've always been really good at just taking photos and videos of like really special moments. And those things are so valuable or invaluable. Like to look back on and be like, oh, I would have forgotten about this a moment. Because your brain, like you really do forget that things happen, especially like when you're in your 20s and things are just like constantly changing. Like it's really nice to reflect, and like I'm trying to figure out ways to reflect from this year because this year's been insane, just a crazy year. Like a lot has happened, and I'm still figuring out like how do I reflect it back to me, like what have I done? What has changed? Just because I feel like this has been like one of the most impactful years of my life.
It's so easy to let your entire life pass by without even realizing that you are growing so much. And have this podcast is to talk about these things, to just encourage people that the more present that you are, the more that you're here, the more that you can really see that, whoa, like the lens that I'm viewing life is changing, and it's incredible. Like you're doing incredible things just by, again, like the small, not freaking out that GarageBand isn't working when you're recording the podcast. Like that is so much progress.
Well, and I think tying it back to it, it's like when you do things that are for yourself that are outside of work, like things that you have that are your own, whether that's like a hobby, like who knows, knitting, like seeing your progress, like because there's always going to be things that get involved in that, and those are going to be the things that you care about. Those are going to be the things that reflect back to you.
And also on the lens of social media and the lens of analytics, making sure you're not looking to analytics as a value of your self-worth or progress, because it's so easy, and I have done this with social media, feeling like my worth is determined by analytics. That's completely wrong. Our human experience, being in this amazing life, is so valuable and is not determined by the numbers or the likes or the views or the comments that you get. And I think seeing that and really understanding really having a sense of your self-worth can be so helpful to understand progress in a healthy way and not in a sense that is so based on ego that it actually is making you more miserable than you thought.
Yeah. And perfectionism. You're never going to start out and be where you quote unquote want to be, because that's what's going to stop you from taking any sort of steps that are going to help you move forward. I think this has been a really good chat.
Why don't we, I think maybe I like the idea of ending the episode with like a piece of advice from each of us. I can go first. I feel like just like reflecting on this whole conversation, my piece of advice for myself and for other people listening is that don't wait for the right moment to start something. Don't wait for the perfect moment to do something. Don't be so hard on yourself when you're trying to learn something. Just try to be there. Just try to be present. Just try to really immerse what it feels like to do the thing you're doing. Even if you want to so badly judge it and say, I don't want to do this. This is so hard. Remember that this is your life and you really only have one chance. We only have one chance. So take the risk that you want to do. And whether that involves something that you're scared of, whether that involves social media, whether that doesn't, like whether it just involves taking the risk, meaning it's a risk for me to try to really not judge myself anymore. I think from this whole conversation, we started off talking about like the reason we took the break, and now that we're back in it, knowing that even though the first season was really hard for us, that without it being hard, we wouldn't get to the point now where I feel so excited about this. So just jump into it and don't be scared to do it, because it might be hard, but it's those hard parts that are going to get you to where you want to be.
It's a great piece of advice. I'll compliment that by saying that you as a person are your number one asset. You have to invest in yourself. And before you can invest in yourself, you have to take care of yourself. And I think you have to really be honest with yourself of like how you're feeling physically, of how you're feeling mentally, emotionally, socially, and like really make sure that you're filling up your cup, because no one else is going to do that. And in order to do the things that you want to do, you really have to take care of yourself of figuring out, what do I need to do in order to make sure that I'm feeling at a good baseline, that I'm feeling relaxed, ready to take things on. And that can be various types of things, whether that's like making sure, you're going to get some alone time, going to take a bath, or that could be like hey, I need to go and socialize. I think it's like just knowing what those things are, and like, you know what they are, like deep down, like you have those things. So I think just leaning into those and not being afraid to like set those boundaries for yourself and really take care of yourself so that you can do the things that you really want to do.
Not being scared to do what's best for you. I like that. Yeah. Well, this has been fun. I like how we didn't have a structure.
This was great.
It was just a conversation. And that's kind of like, that's all we want this to be, right?
Yeah.
We just want this to be a conversation between us that we share with you guys, because we're not trying to do something super structured. We're just, not that anything's wrong with structure, but we just want to be us. And we want you guys in turn to be you. We want to help you live authentically by just sharing our thoughts, showing what it means to be human and living life unpotted. So thank you guys so much for listening. It's been so awesome. We're so excited to be back in season 2. Check out our Instagram as always for update, and subscribe to our newsletter on our website. But we'll see you guys next Tuesday. Thank you so much for listening. And until then, live life unpotted.
See you next week.